Celeste Drayton thought she was checking in for a peaceful night at a quiet Florida hotel Griffin Lorne. The hotel manager assured her everything was routine. But 4 days later, Darla Mukes, the housekeeper, found Celeste's stabbed body, hidden under a mattress where 2 guests had unknowingly slept. As Detective Ramiell Price dug deeper, all eyes turned to Everett Tyne, Celeste's ex-fiancé, who had checked in across the hall under a fake name. What began as a missing person case quickly spiraled into one of Florida's most chilling true crimes. Celeste Drayton had always been drawn to the quiet corners of the world, the places not often featured in travel guides, where faded signage and salt-stained walls held more charm than polished resorts. When she arrived in Clearwater, Florida, it was supposed to be just another stop on her solo travel blog journey. Her followers on social media were used to her breezy posts and sunset snapshots, so when she shared a moody image of the dusky shoreline with a caption that read, "Tonight feels strange," it barely raised concern. But for Celeste, something about the Palms Crest Inn didn't sit right from the moment she stepped into the lobby. The hotel was small, dated, and tucked away from the more vibrant tourist spots. Its sign flickered erratically, casting a dim, orange glow over the narrow parking lot. Celeste's check-in was recorded at 6:12 p.m., and the front desk log confirmed she was assigned room 237. A security camera captured her wheeling a bright blue suitcase down the hallway. That was the last visual anyone would have of her alive. The next morning, hotel manager Griffin Lorne noticed her car hadn't moved. By noon, her breakfast voucher hadn't been used, and housekeeping reported the room as still occupied. But Griffin brushed it off. Guests were unpredictable. Some slept late, some left without checking out. It wasn't until the 3rd day, when the room was still untouched, that staff began to worry. A knock on her door went unanswered. The keycard system still showed her as checked in, but there was no response inside. Griffin used a master key to enter the room, noting that nothing seemed particularly out of place. The bed was made, the air conditioning still on, and her suitcase was perched neatly by the dresser. The only noticeable absence was the guest herself. Her phone kept ringing, but went straight to voicemail. Text messages from friends and family went unanswered. Her Instagram, once updated daily, remained frozen on that eerie beach photo. By day 4, concern turned into urgency. Celeste's friends began calling the hotel. Her family in Arizona filed a missing persons report. Local police were dispatched to the property to investigate. Detective Ramiell Price arrived later that evening, reviewing security footage and access logs. The surveillance system was old and partially corrupted, with several hours of footage mysteriously missing. The hallway camera near room 237 had gone dark shortly after Celeste was seen entering. There was no record of her ever exiting the building. Inside the room, nothing screamed foul play, no blood, no overturned furniture, no signs of forced entry. Yet something felt undeniably wrong. Her belongings remained untouched, and her wallet was still in her bag. The television remote rested on the bedside table, and a damp towel was slung over the bathroom door. Her journal, an item she rarely traveled without, was open on the desk with a half-written entry ending mid-sentence. Still, with no body and no physical evidence of violence, the case was stuck. Celeste was officially a missing person. Flyers went up across town, local media began asking questions, and online speculation started to swirl. But the Palms Crest Inn remained open for business. 2 more guests would stay in room 237 after Celeste's disappearance. They slept in the same bed she had, unaware of what lay just inches beneath them. The staff noticed a worsening odor in the room when they tried to mask with air fresheners and open windows. The air conditioning unit was blamed for the musty stench, and the mattress was described by one guest as too hard to sleep on comfortably. But again, no one investigated further. It wasn't until housekeeper Darla Mukes lifted the mattress, trying to find the source of the smell, that the truth came to light. A stained bedsheet, a lifeless arm, and a scream that echoed down the corridor and into local headlines. Celeste Drayton hadn't left the hotel. She had never checked out. She had been there the whole time, hidden, stabbed, and stuffed beneath the bed where strangers slept, oblivious to the horror beneath them. The call to 911 came at 10:17 a.m. Darla Mukes, the housekeeper who discovered the body, was nearly incoherent from shock. Emergency responders arrived within minutes and sealed off the second floor of the Palms. Crushed in, room 237 became the epicenter of a horrifying crime scene, one that would soon grip national attention. The odor that had long been dismissed as plumbing or mildew was now clearly the scent of decomposition. The mattress had concealed something far darker than anyone had imagined. Celeste Drayton's body was found curled beneath the mattress base, wrapped in a thin hotel bedsheet, her face partially covered in adhesive tape. Her eyes were open, unnervingly wide, and her hands were bound at the wrists. The heat had accelerated the decomposition process, and it was immediately clear she had been dead for several days. Her body had deep stab wounds across the abdomen and side, more than a dozen, according to the preliminary autopsy report. Bruises ran along her arms and thighs, evidence of a struggle, possibly one that lasted for minutes in terrifying silence. Detectives quickly cordoned off the room. Every object, every smudge, every trace of disturbance became a potential clue. There was no sign of forced entry, and her room key was missing. Her purse was untouched, and there was no indication that robbery had been the motive. Even more unsettling was the placement of her body. The killer hadn't dumped her body elsewhere or attempted to cover up the crime outside. Instead, they had made a deliberate decision to leave her inside the room, directly under the mattress, ensuring that her presence would go unnoticed by guests who followed. Police interviewed the two guests who had stayed in the room after Celeste. The first, a traveling salesman from Georgia, had complained about a stiff back and a strange smell, but attributed it to the age of the hotel. The second, a woman named Sandra Hawley, expressed discomfort during her stay. She had experienced headaches and had difficulty sleeping, even claiming she had vivid nightmares. Yet neither guest had suspected anything as sinister as a corpse under their bed. The autopsy confirmed that Celeste had died within 24 hours of her check-in. The condition of her body, paired with the last digital activity on her phone, helped investigators narrow down the timeline. Surveillance footage remained unreliable. The camera outside room 237 had inexplicably stopped recording just minutes after Celeste entered. Technicians later confirmed that the system had been manually disrupted. Someone with knowledge of the hotel's security system had deleted or disabled specific recordings. The immediate suspicion turned toward the hotel's staff. Griffin Lorne, the manager, was brought in for questioning. He was calm, cooperative, and provided access to all hotel logs. He maintained that Celeste had been a regular guest and that nothing about her stay seemed out of the ordinary. However, discrepancies in the check-in logs raised red flags. Room 237 had been marked as vacant on the system despite being occupied. This allowed other guests to be checked into the room after Celeste's murder without raising immediate alarms. Only someone with administrative access could have altered the digital records. Further investigation revealed that Griffin had worked in a Tennessee hotel chain years prior, where a similar case had occurred. A young woman vanished after checking in and was never found. That case had gone cold, and Griffin had never been charged or directly implicated. Still, the coincidence was troubling. Detective Ramiell Price began digging deeper into Griffin's past, requesting files and interviewing former co-workers. Meanwhile, forensics scoured room 237. Small blood traces were found in the bathroom sink, suggesting the killer had attempted to clean up. There were partial fingerprints on the inner frame of the bed where Celeste had been hidden, but the prints were smudged and incomplete. One significant piece of evidence was recovered from beneath the bed, a small keychain, pink with a broken charm attached. It didn't belong to Celeste, according to her family. The object had no prints, no obvious DNA, yet it seemed to taunt investigators like a calling card left behind. Public outrage grew. Media outlets ran headline after headline about the body in the bed, the haunted room, the negligence of the hotel. Palms Crest Inn shut its doors temporarily as police expanded their search. Tips began to pour in, including one anonymous caller who claimed Celeste had a stalker, someone who had followed her from Arizona. That name would soon give the case a terrifying new twist. Asterisk. Detective Ramiell Price knew the case had crossed from tragic to something far more disturbing. As the forensic teams combed through room 237 and the digital forensics team examined the corrupted surveillance data, new questions began to surface, pointing to a possibility that the killer had not only planned the murder, but had taken deliberate steps to manipulate the investigation from the start. The hotel's electronic records were a mess. The logs, which automatically tracked keycard usage, had major inconsistencies. Celeste's keycard had only been used once, when she entered her room the evening she checked in. There were no further entries logged. Yet, in the days following, other guests had entered room 237 with their assigned keys. This could only be possible if someone manually marked the room as vacant in the system, reissuing the room to new guests. That could only be done by someone with administrative access, namely, Griffin Lorne, of one of the senior front desk clerks. The corrupted surveillance footage was even more troubling. The cameras covering the second floor had hours of missing time, starting just after Celeste's arrival. This wasn't a system glitch. It was a deliberate deletion. Technicians confirmed that someone with physical access to the security server had either disabled or overwritten the footage during that window. Griffin swore he hadn't touched the server in weeks, but there was no way to verify that. When asked about staff protocols, Griffin admitted that he often left the server room unlocked and unmonitored at night. It was a lapse in procedure, but one he claimed was common in small hotels with minimal staffing. Digging deeper into the digital logs, police uncovered something even more chilling. A user with admin privileges had logged into the hotel system from the front desk terminal late at night, at a time when Griffin claimed he was off-site. When shown the time-stamped login, Griffin looked genuinely rattled. He insisted no one else had his password, but the system didn't lie. Someone had accessed administrative controls to alter check-in records, reassign the room, and disable alerts. Forensics teams found a single thread of dark synthetic fabric on the underside of the mattress base, wedged between the slats. Lab analysis suggested it came from nylon athletic wear, likely belonging to a male. Combined with the partially smeared fingerprints and the pink keychain, the case began to suggest premeditation and experience. This wasn't a random act of violence, it had a signature. While the investigation around Griffin Lorne continued, new information emerged about Celeste's personal life. A friend in Arizona reported that she had mentioned receiving strange emails and being followed. She never named the person, but hinted it was someone from her past, someone she'd once been close to but now feared. The messages had increased in frequency just weeks before her trip to Florida. Detective Price turned his focus to Celeste's travel route. One flight booking stood out. Though she had flown from Arizona to Tampa, a one-way ticket was purchased under her name 2 days later to return home. But Celeste never made it to the airport. Even more curious was the IP address used to book that return flight. It traced back to a Miami coffee shop. Price dispatched officers to pull surveillance from the shop's cameras. What they found was disturbing footage showing a man using the public terminal near the time of the booking. He wore a baseball cap pulled low, a disposable mask, and sunglasses. His features were hard to make out, but one employee remembered his eyes cold, unblinking, and oddly familiar. Back at the station, Price dug into Celeste's background. A name kept surfacing: Everett Tyne, her former fiancé. A man who had abruptly disappeared from her life after their engagement ended under mysterious circumstances. She had once filed a restraining order against him, citing obsessive behavior and threats, but later withdrew it for unknown reasons. Public records revealed Everett had recently moved to Florida, just weeks before Celeste's murder. The bombshell came when hotel payment records showed that someone using an alias had checked into a room at the Palms Crest Inn, just across the hall from room 237, under a different name. That guest had paid in cash and left without officially checking out. The alias used matched a known identity Everett had once used in a fraud case years ago. Suddenly, the pieces began to align. This wasn't a random killing. This wasn't about theft or rage. It was personal. Someone had followed Celeste, infiltrated her hotel, manipulated the records, and left her hidden in a room for days, just to watch the world fail to notice. Detective Ramiell Price now had a name that made everything click into place: Everett Tyne. Celeste Drayton's ex-fiancé wasn't just a ghost from her past. He had potentially orchestrated her death in the most disturbing way imaginable. Records confirmed he had lived in Arizona until recently, with no known employment, no steady residence, and a history of erratic behavior. He had vanished from public records shortly after Celeste ended their engagement. Now, years later, he had reappeared in Florida, within walking distance of the very hotel where her body was found. Investigators began retracing Everett's movements. His most recent address in Miami led to a small, unfurnished apartment rented under a fake name. Inside, the unit was almost empty, save for a mattress, an unplugged mini-fridge, and a backpack containing several prepaid phones, a burner laptop, and a small hunting knife. Although there was no blood or direct physical evidence linking the knife to the murder, its presence raised alarms. The team pulled financial data from nearby stores. A local hardware shop had surveillance footage of Everett disguised in a hoodie, hat, and surgical mask, purchasing duct tape, gloves, and a retractable utility knife 2 days before Celeste checked into the hotel. The purchase alone wasn't enough to arrest him, but it was another piece of an increasingly twisted puzzle. Further review of cell tower data showed that Everett's burner phone had pinged near Palms Crest Inn the same night Celeste checked in. Even more chilling, the signal placed him near her hotel room during the time of her suspected death. Investigators now knew for certain Everett was not only in Clearwater, he was lurking in the shadows of Celeste's final hours. As detectives attempted to track him down, a call came in from a marina worker just outside Tampa. The man had spotted someone matching Everett's description living on a derelict sailboat that hadn't moved in weeks. Officers were dispatched immediately. When they approached the vessel, it was clear someone had been living aboard. Clothing was strung from nails on the cabin wall, empty food containers littered the space, and a large corkboard was mounted with a disturbing collection of newspaper clippings and printed articles. Among the headlines were stories of women who had gone missing in various states. Some of the cases remained unsolved. Tucked in the center of the board was a photograph of Celeste, printed from one of her social media accounts. Written in red ink beneath, it was a chilling message: "She forgot me." I reminded her. Detectives found Everett hiding in a crawlspace. Beneath the hull, weak, disheveled, and armed with a small blade he quickly dropped when surrounded. He was taken into custody without incident. In the interrogation room, he remained silent for hours, refusing to answer any questions. He stared at the wall, almost trance-like. Finally, when handed a notepad, he scribbled a single sentence: "She shouldn't have come looking for paradise." DNA testing was expedited. Scraped skin cells from beneath Celeste's fingernails matched Everett's. A single strand of his hair was found on the underside of the bed frame where her body had been hidden. Combined with the surveillance footage, financial records, and the physical presence of the shrine on the sailboat, the case against him became airtight. As the investigation continued, detectives began connecting Everett to other disappearances. A woman in Tennessee had gone missing under similar circumstances in 2018 after staying in a roadside inn where Everett had once worked maintenance under a false identity. Another case in New Mexico bore eerie similarities, but with no concrete evidence. Those connections remained theories for now. What set the Clearwater case apart was the killer's proximity to the victim living across the hall, altering hotel records, hiding in plain sight. Everett had orchestrated the perfect illusion, stalking Celeste without detection, embedding himself into the setting, and vanishing before anyone noticed she was even gone. If not for the persistent odor in room 237, it's possible her body might never have been found. The crime was no longer just about one woman. It was about obsession, revenge, and the calculated steps someone would take to feel control again. Everett Tyne had built his trap slowly, methodically, and executed it with disturbing precision. But even the most perfect illusion eventually starts to crack, and when it did, the truth came flooding out. After Everett Tyne's arrest, the weight of the investigation shifted from discovery to prosecution. The state of Florida was preparing one of its most disturbing homicide cases in recent memory, and the evidence was stacking up quickly. Prosecutors moved swiftly to secure a strong case. The motive was clear. Everett had been obsessed with Celeste for years. His actions were not impulsive. They were methodical, precise, and carried out with a sense of cold detachment that prosecutors described as predatory. But as the case deepened, more unsettling revelations began to surface. Inside Everett's abandoned sailboat, forensic analysts recovered a leather-bound journal tucked into a hidden compartment beneath the bed. It wasn't just filled with thoughts or sketches, it was a detailed chronicle of his surveillance. For over a year, Everett had tracked Celeste's movements, her blog entries, her social media check-ins, her flight confirmations, even receipts from restaurants she visited. He had followed her across 3 states without her knowing, documenting her routines and using disposable phones to avoid detection. The journal revealed his intentions long before Celeste arrived in Florida. He wrote of her as a symbol of betrayal, a phrase he repeated often. One chilling passage read, "To make her vanish, I must become the void." This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a performance, a twisted ritual of control. And perhaps the most disturbing part was how close he came to getting away with it. When room 237 was finally cleared and reopened for detailed forensic testing, additional traces were discovered. Behind the dresser, investigators found a crumpled paper napkin with Everett's partial fingerprint and a faint smear of blood. The blood matched Celeste's DNA. The presence of the napkin placed Everett directly at the scene during or immediately after the killing. In addition, a boot print barely visible in dried cleaning solution on the bathroom tile matched the size and tread pattern of hiking boots found on Everett's boat. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Everett refused to cooperate. He never spoke during interrogations, never reacted during court appearances. During his arraignment, he stood silent as the charges were read: first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and unlawful confinement. His public defender entered a plea of not guilty on his behalf. The trial date was set, but the court of public opinion had already made its decision. The story dominated national headlines. News segments titled, "The Body Under the Mattress," flooded every network. True crime podcasts dissected the case piece by piece. The Palms Crest Inn, now permanently closed, became the subject of internet lore and local ghost stories. Online, theorists speculated about other victims, drawing connections between Everett and a growing number of cold cases with similar hallmarks: female victims, Isolated lodgings and unexplained disappearances. Celeste Drayton's funeral was held in her hometown in Arizona. Hundreds attended, including readers of her travel blog who had followed her journey for years. Her parents later released a public statement, calling for stricter hotel surveillance protocols and national databases to track transient guests using false identities. Her legacy became more than her tragic end. It became a warning about the dangers that can hide behind familiar doors. Back in Florida, room 237 was never reopened. The room was gutted, sealed, and later became the subject of a local ordinance requiring hotels to disclose any violent deaths that occurred on their premises. A small memorial was placed in the hotel's lobby before the building was torn down, entirely replaced with a parking lot and new signage. But for many, the events that unfolded there were not so easily erased. Everett Tyne remains in custody, awaiting trial. Prosecutors are seeking the death penalty, citing the calculated and monstrous nature of the crime. Detectives continue to review open cases in other states for potential links, and Everett's journal is still being analyzed for additional names, dates, or patterns. There's growing suspicion that Celeste may not have been his first victim only the first one found. The truth about Everett Tyne may never be fully known. But what is certain is that one woman's final night in a modest Florida hotel revealed a darkness that had been hiding in plain sight. A predator waited silently in the room across the hall, and by the time anyone noticed, it was already too late. Asterisk.